In a strategic corner of East Asia, a conflict shaped by global ideologies divided a people, redrew borders, and created one of the most tense regions on the planet. The so-called Korean War did not end with a definitive peace agreement. It was merely suspended by an armistice, and its profound effects remain to this day, casting a long shadow over global politics. This is the story of the conflict that never officially ended, a frozen war whose embers still glow beneath the surface of international diplomacy. We will explore how a once unified nation was torn apart and how the harsh tactics of the Cold War created a division that continues to shape our world. Before the lines were drawn and the world watched with bated breath, Korea was a unified nation with a rich and storied history stretching back millennia. For centuries, it thrived with its own unique culture, a distinct language, and a strong sense of national identity. From the grandeur of the Goryeo dynasty to the intellectual achievements of the Joseon era, Korea forged its own path, creating stunning art, pioneering scientific advancements, and developing complex social structures. But as the 20th century dawned, the world around it was changing rapidly. Imperial ambitions from neighboring powers and the relentless march of global events began to exert immense pressure on the peninsula. Korea, once a master of its own destiny, was slowly being transformed into a strategic piece on an international chessboard, its fate increasingly tied to the agendas of powerful nations far beyond its borders. With the end of the Second World War in 1945, the global landscape was completely reshaped. The old empires crumbled, and two new superpowers emerged, each with competing ideologies: the United States and the Soviet Union. As these giants began their global competition for influence, territories that had been under Japanese control became focal points of this new rivalry. Korea was one such place. To manage the surrender of Japanese troops, the Allied powers made a fateful decision. Korea would be provisionally divided along the 38th parallel. This line, initially intended as a temporary military demarcation, quickly hardened into a political border. In the north, a regime aligned with the Socialist Bloc and backed by the Soviet Union was established. In the south, a structure supported by the United States and other Western nations took shape. This division, meant to be temporary, created two distinct administrations, setting the stage for decades of tension and conflict. What began as a political division, a line on a map, quickly escalated into a full-blown armed conflict. The simmering ideological tensions between the North and the South erupted. In June 1950, organized forces began major military operations, crossing borders and pushing deep into opposing territory. The initial territorial advances were swift and dramatic, with cities like Seoul changing hands multiple times. The entire peninsula became a volatile front line, one of the first and most direct confrontations of what would become known as the Cold War. It was no longer a dispute between two administrations. It was a battle between two worldviews, fought on Korean soil. The conflict demonstrated how quickly political disagreements could spiral into devastating military confrontations, turning a once peaceful land into a theater of strategic maneuvers and relentless advances. The conflict on the Korean Peninsula quickly ceased to be a merely regional or civil affair. As the scale of the military operations grew, the international community was drawn in. Alarmed by the rapid territorial advances, the newly formed United Nations passed a resolution to intervene. A coalition of forces from 16 countries, led prominently by the United States, entered the scene to support the South. This marked a significant moment, as it was one of the first major military actions undertaken by the UN. In response, socialist powers, particularly China and the Soviet Union, began to provide substantial support to the northern side. The peninsula became a global stage where the world's superpowers tested their strength, strategies, and military technology, not through direct confrontation, but through proxies. Diplomatic halls buzzed with activity, alliances were forged, and the fate of Korea was debated by nations thousands of miles away. While leaders made strategic decisions and generals planned their next moves, millions of civilians were caught in the crossfire. For the ordinary people of Korea, life was turned upside down. The conflict triggered a massive humanitarian crisis, forcing millions to flee their homes with only what they could carry. Entire families were separated in the chaos, many never to see their loved ones again. Villages that had stood for generations were emptied, and bustling cities were reduced to landscapes of devastation. The routines of daily life, farming, going to school, gathering with neighbors vanished, replaced by a constant struggle for survival. Scarcity of food, medicine, and shelter became the norm. The story of the Korean War is not just one of armies and borders, but of the immense personal challenges and the resilience of a civilian population enduring unimaginable hardship. After years of intense back-and-forth confrontations, the conflict reached a grinding stalemate. The initial rapid advances gave way to a war of attrition, with front lines that barely moved despite immense effort from both sides. Neither the UN-led coalition nor the forces supported by the Socialist bloc could achieve a definitive, lasting victory. The peninsula was locked in a deadlock. Faced with this reality, the warring parties began a long and arduous negotiation process. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. This agreement was not a peace treaty. It was a ceasefire. It stopped the active fighting and created a 2.5-mile-wide demilitarized zone, or DMZ, that runs across the peninsula near the 38th parallel. This heavily fortified buffer zone, intended to be temporary, still exists today as one of the most guarded borders in the world. The armistice of 1953 brought an end to the active fighting, but it did not bring an end to the war. Tactically, the Korean War has never concluded. The armistice was a military agreement to stop hostilities, not a political treaty to establish lasting peace. As a result, the two Koreas remain in a formal state of war, divided by the DMZ. Over the decades, this division has solidified. North and South Korea have evolved into two profoundly different nations, with opposing political ideologies, vastly different economic systems, and divergent social structures. The South has become a thriving, democratic, and technologically advanced market economy. The North has remained an isolated, single-party state with a centrally planned economy. The promise of reunification, once a shared dream, now seems more distant than ever, a stark reminder that the war's legacy is a permanently fractured nation. Decades after the armistice was signed, the unresolved Korean War continues to cast a long shadow over global affairs. The Korean Peninsula remains a critical geopolitical flashpoint, influencing diplomatic decisions, military strategies, and the delicate balance of power, particularly in East Asia. The presence of international forces, ongoing military exercises, and the North's strategic programs keep the region in a perpetual state of heightened alert. Every diplomatic meeting, every headline, every strategic missile test sends ripples across the globe, affecting relationships between major world powers. The division of Korea is not just a historical footnote. It is an active, ongoing issue that commands the attention of leaders in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and Tokyo, demonstrating how a conflict suspended in time continues to shape our present and future world. The Korean War serves as a powerful and sobering reminder of how global decisions, driven by ideology and strategic competition, can fracture a people for generations. It is a conflict suspended in time, a wound that has never fully healed. The line drawn on a map more than 70 years ago became a physical and emotional barrier that divided families, culture, and a shared history. The echoes of this forgotten war still reverberate in the present day, evident in the tense border, the separate paths of two nations, and the ongoing challenge of achieving a lasting peace. The story of Korea is a testament to the enduring human cost of geopolitical conflict and a challenge to future generations to seek paths of reconciliation and understanding. If you found this exploration of history and geopolitics insightful, please like the video and share it with others who are curious about our world. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming documentaries. Thank you for watching.